Alright guys, the best rogue build from 70 to 90. Let's talk about some upgrades. This is part 3 of a series that we're doing to build the best rogue in the game. So starting right off, the main focus on this video, by the way, if you happen to come across this video and you haven't seen part 1, which covers 1 through 50 to kind of explain the earlier game process, as some people maybe have clicked on like the 50 to 70 and they're like, well, do you have a 1 through 50 guide? Yes, we do. So just check the pinned comment just in case there is anyone out there, as I'm trying to build the best rogue in the entire game, and this build arguably is pretty much the best one. All builds for the rogue in terms of like the best build will be some variant of twisting blades at the end of the day, but nonetheless, let's hop right into what the main focus of this video is, which is essentially gearing up to get the best rolls on every single piece of your gear. Now there are some exceptions that I do kind of want to go over, and I say kind of want to go over because the best in slot for every single character will be the Harlequin crest, the Shako. This item is so incredibly rare because it gives you +4 to all your skills. There are some items, and when I do upload the final version of this, which will be covering levels 90 to 100, this will be the best in slot for every single character. Most people will not acquire this item, at least in the current state. A lot of people didn't even believe this item even existed. They had to clarify over on Twitter that this is a real item in the game because it's so incredibly powerful. So starting right off, let's go ahead and go over basically what has changed with the build and the differences in what you can actually choose. So in terms of the skills, you'll see on my skill bar, instead of running the poison imbuement, I have decided to run shadow imbuement. Why shadow imbuement? Well, it helps clear out the small things, and we have dropped our generator. So the generator is something that gives you almost no damage in the game, but it applies a slow and vulnerability. Now, as you progress, you're going to want to try to get these specific pair of boots. These are the Penitent Glyphs. These are one of the best pair of boots in the entire game because they leave a Trial of Frost. That's going to deal a more multiplier, a 10% X multiplier of more damage to chilled enemies. And we're also going to be applying chill to the enemies because that's going to increase not only our survivability, but add a slow to the enemy so they are crowd controlled, so we can get a lot of more benefits off of the Paragon board to damage versus chilled enemies or slowed, controlled, impaired enemies. You get the idea. These boots are excellent for that. And then on top of that, they have a slow duration reduction, which is nice, but they also apply additional crowd control. So when you're knocking down the enemy or applying any crowd control, it's just going to increase the length at which it lasts, which definitely helps out for not only survivability, but offensive capabilities as well. This is like the only real unique where I'd say it's not that hard to get. If you play this game, you'll eventually get these. It's not like the Harlequin crest where there's only literally 2 in the world that have dropped, at least as of right now of me making this video, but that will be one of the items that will kind of be required. If you don't have them, don't worry, you can still run another pair of boots. You can just get anything with really movement speed is what you're looking forward to getting. You can also get energy cost reduction, but in the boot category, there isn't really anything that's super strong. There are a few defensive options if you want to, like, that you can get, but for the most part, I wouldn't really worry about the rolls on the boots other than get movement speed. So starting right off, let's go ahead and go over the skill changes over here on the build. So if you want to, you can still actually play any of the poison ones where you're going to be able to get yourself some damage reduction with the poison. So if you need to have more survivability, debilitating toxins is still a fantastic option to select because you will still apply poison with the poison trap, as it's still one of the best forms of getting some sort of damage over time. So there is some sort of a trap on the enemy. So when the enemy is, of course, not only taking more damage, but they're affected by a trap skill, which really helps out with the resource for your death trap because we do not have a generator. One thing that you want to do with every single Diablo build, for the most part, there could be some exceptions, but you don't want to have a generator. A generator is to give you energy so you can deal the damage. It doesn't matter if you're dealing like 30, 40% more damage when you have a generator versus doing 100% of damage at all intervals, if that makes any sense. Because I've seen people say, well, look, I can go ahead and do combo points with like a very specific ability, and look at my damage. I can hit them for 1,000,000 damage. The 1,000,000 damage is not like a real DPS because even though you hit for 1,000,000, it took you a while to build that up. I could sit there and spam twisting blades, and even though the number is lower, the DPS is actually higher overall. So that's just kind of like an explanation because I've seen some people talk about like, oh, look at this guy doing penetrating shot, he can hit for 1,000,000. It's going to be like multiple combo points, my energy has to be full, and then I can hit really hard, and then you have like your guaranteed crit with like Sky Hunter. For the most part, this is going to be the best build for most players, and you do want to drop off your generator. So what has actually essentially changed? So the generator, doesn't matter what points you put into. Nothing has really changed here with the twisting blades. I do like giving myself extra movement speed. One thing that I've noticed when you're grinding in general in these dungeons, I mean, look at that giant pop. That was all the shadow blades. That's with the freeze as well, which we'll get into how we're doing freeze. And you may want to think about partying up with people. That really helps out. But really getting some additional movement speed in combat really helps out not only your clear speed, but to actually dodge things. So this is actually more defenses, and it technically increases your clear speed, which kind of is correlated to your actual DPS. But next up, we're still running concussive, even though we've dropped the poison trap in some variants. Like if you want to, you can drop poison trap. Now, really with this video, it's kind of up to you, not only on terms of like your rolls, because your gear may say bonus damage to poison, so you really want to keep poison trap. But if you want to drop poison trap completely, hey, that's up to you. But just keep in mind that you need to be able to hit the enemy in some sort of a way so you can activate our key passive, so we can actually have our cooldown via exposure on our traps, so we can actually spam death trap just to regen all of our energy, because remember, the goal is to drop our generator. So the changes that I've made with it over here come down to specifically on this tier over here. Obviously still twisting blades. I already mentioned the additional movement speed. Still running the shadow step, and then of course concussive. Since we have a thing where we get to knock down the enemy and it applies at dazed, this really helps out, because when we crit an enemy that is dazed, and you'll easily have 60+% crit with this build, you're going to be able to of course knock them down, and that knockdown will apply additional crit, and it's also a form of crowd control, so it's excellent for that. And then nothing new with here. I'm still running the dark shroud because of movement speed. If you want to run dash, I've seen some people say, you know, is dash okay? Dash did get nerfed. It took a 5% nerf in terms of its numerical stats. It used to do plus 20% crit damage, but now it only does 15. It's still good though. Like, it's still not like a useless skill, but people do like it. So if you want to play that overall, that's fine. But I personally prefer dark shroud, and the reason why isn't necessarily because of its damage reduction. It's just to make the movement speed of this game feel so much better, because some of these dungeons, you get an item, you walk all the way back. And then I am putting 1 point into shadow imbuement. So as long as the enemy dies, I'm going to get massive amount of resource. I put 1 point into shadow crash, which helps stun the enemy. It doesn't really matter too much. We're really here for the consuming shadow, which actually works with not only death trap, but it actually works with your imbuement. So when we see the enemies just completely pop on the screen, that is due to shadow imbuement. So if you want to run poison imbuement, it's not necessarily bad. It's just I like this for resource because I have no generator. Poison imbuement, the difference between shadow and poison, by the way, ice is not even really worth running for the most part. So some people ask, well, is ice okay? I've never seen anyone play ice. For the most part, you can play poison, you can play shadow. It doesn't really matter too much. It's kind of up to your playstyle. Poison is way better against bosses. If you want to do any like YouTube highlights and stuff, honestly, poison deletes things way faster. However, shadow imbuement will give you resource, and it gives you those nice juicy pops, which I like when you group up all the enemies with death trap. All the explosions are just awesome to see too. It makes the game a lot more fun for me, and the point of any video game at the end of the day is to have more fun, and I have way more fun playing with shadow imbuement versus poison imbuement. I have more fun showing you guys how fast we can kill bosses, and like some of my videos have went viral on TikTok because I'm killing some of these bosses in just like a few seconds, and people are like, dude, this is impossible, he's hacking. It comes down to poison imbuement is absolutely bonkers when it comes to bosses. Most people that are playing like bosses, if you're doing like any special boss, okay, poison imbuement is definitely the way to go, because well, you're only got one boss on the screen, and shadow imbuement isn't going to give you that extra resource when you kill the enemy, because well, the enemy's going to take a couple minutes to kill if you're doing like Uber Lilith or whatever. But anyways, nothing else has really changed over here except for we drop our lucky hit chance as well as getting the extra energy. Sure, it's extra resource if you want to. If you do need it, like your rolls aren't perfect on your cooldown reduction, or you don't have the resource cost reduction maybe on your amulet, sure, by all means, you can still get these. Maybe instead of getting the movement speed or any of that damage like with malice or exploit, feel free to go ahead and keep innervation as well as second wind, but you do not need alchemist's fortune over here. But there's not really any changes with the skills in terms of our gameplay. It's kind of the same concept. You can throw down a trap, group up everyone, and then just spam twisting blades, and then just apply the poison just so you can have the cooldown reduction on our death trap. Other things I did want to go over that are kind of important in terms of the pieces of gear. So you'll notice I'm playing in a party. I've been mentioning this time and time again, playing in a party is so much more efficient as long as the player is good. The only exception is if the player is so slow and bad that you need them both to like enter an area, then it does become slower. But as long as you're playing with someone within your level, they're not going to be that bad, more than likely. At least not as right now. If you're watching this as a 70 to 90 guy, no one's going to be terrible at the game that's level 70 at this point. But let's go over the different changes in items. So I'm running Frostbitten Aspect because I'm playing with someone that is actually going to be a cold sorceress. So they do want to apply freeze, because when they apply freeze, they just get free damage. I'm running this sort of because of that, and it actually gives us increased damage because we get to deal more crit strike damage against frozen enemies. So it's okay for that, but it really helps them out. The clear speed sometimes is determined if you are going to be able to have some sort of synergy with your teammates, making enemies case, a vulnerable can really help out because sorceress basically has to pop their skill called Ice Nova that takes a while. And I don't want to get too far into like every single combination of like, you know, what classes work well with each other, but at the end of the day, applying vulnerability is always going to help. If you freeze the enemy or apply any CC, it's going to significantly help out. So as far as in our helmet, that's what I'm running. It doesn't have to be in the helmet, you can put it in another slot. So this is where the build gets a little bit different from the previous ones. We're running Aspect of Shared Misery, so when we crowd control an enemy, there's a chance for that to spread. That works really well with our other one, which we'll get into because I'll have to move it and I don't want to cover too much of the screen, even though right now we're just kind of in town. So let's go ahead and move this. So now you can see, let's move it just a little bit over. So now with this over here, it's called Mangler's Aspect. I like to put this on my amulet because it gives a higher value. You have like a 60-something% chance whenever we deal direct damage to a vulnerable enemy, which we have exploit, so everything's going to be vulnerable. It makes it so there's a chance to daze them. So we can just start doing all of that crowd control, and all this stuff is going to be really key for our resource generation. Next up for our gloves, we have the Vengeful one, so this is not really any change. I think before I had it in my weapon. Sometimes it's like you get a higher roll, you just kind of over imprint things or you swap pieces of gear, but it doesn't really matter. You can put it in your weapons as well. Then we have Temerity. This is one of my favorite pair of pants in the game, but if you don't have Temerity, this isn't really going to be something that is required. I personally like Temerity. If you do want to run pants that can give you dodge chance, dexterity, or anything in terms of defensive departments, getting life is kind of the ideal choice, but Temerity are pretty decent pants, and they're not super rare, so I included them here. It's not like a Shaco. Penitent Greaves, these are a must for anyone that wants to get the bonus damage to chill, which is actually on the skill tree over here. There's one area where you get to get bonus damage to chill targets that you can put in over here. So this is called Frigid Finesse. This gives you more damage than anything else, but it has to apply to chilled enemies. If you just walk up to the enemy, they're automatically chilled. There's a giant snail trail of like the blue ice, and a lot of people are asking, where do you farm these? There's not any specific thing. You can get these in World Tier 3 and 4, but ideally over in 4 because it'll be, of course, an ancestral one. And then no change, you want the Twisting Blade, the Blade Dancer's aspect. And then for the rings, you want this. You want restore 1 to 4 of your primary resource when you crowd control an enemy. So you just basically crowd control it, and you just get, that's how I get the infinite energy. I know this is kind of blocking it now because you'll see that we're low on energy, but watch, as soon as we go into like a group, you'll see that the energy just starts going up. And that's 2 different ways, obviously, when we crowd control, and on top of that, when we actually do any form of like knockdowns, like all those things, and on top of that, the shadow and beam. Oh, also another thing that I think is quite important. So if you have the resource and the cooldowns, this is something that you can swap. You can run improved Twisting Blades to actually apply daze automatically, so then you're going to be able to, of course, knock them down more frequently. You could still run advanced Twisting Blades. It's just gotten nerfed so many dang times to the point where, like, if you have the threshold, the daze will be better, but if your cooldowns aren't up, you're noticing like your like Death Trap, and it is not always up when you need it to be up because you need the mana or energy in Rogue's case, then yeah, that is another option as well. But I'd really like to get as much resource as possible, so having things like this really helps out. And then Ravenous Aspect, so killing a vulnerable enemy grants us increased energy. That's going to be fantastic. And then Crit Strikes with core skills gives us more attack speed. And then in addition to that, we get to deal more damage when we have a barrier. You don't have to have Temerity, but I would say you kind of need Penitent Greaves for the Paragon board, but you can swap this. You know, it's not like a deal breaker for the build, but Temerity works really well because it's a very high uptime. You can run Edgemaster's Aspect, the one where it's like you get to do more damage based off of your resource because you have Inner Sight still, but there's no real change with the build in terms of the gems and like the skills. You already like saw the skills, and then we're still running Inner Sight because I think it's the best dang thing in the game. Now on top of that, the Paragon board, I'll have it linked for you guys because I don't want to go over every single node because I think that's kind of excessive here, right, for the video, because it'd be a half an hour long, tell you the exact pathing that I went to. I'll just link it. But the thing that you do want to get is getting the controlled impair duration reduction, which is going to get into something else that I want to talk about. This is one of the best stats in the entire game. Unfortunately, it doesn't roll on every single piece of gear. You can have up to 54% reduced controlled impaired duration. So that's anywhere where you would lose effect of your character. I believe this is going to be knockdown, stun, freeze, slow, anything that like just makes it so your experience is really bad. I've noticed this, and I even like made a whole build, and if you guys haven't seen the build, I made a build called the Shadow Death Rogue build, and it was supposed to be the fastest build in the game. I was running concealment because of just the amount of like stuns, roots. Like if you played any of the areas with spiders like burrows, like you just get rooted. You can't move, and it's like so annoying to play this game. So I heavily value that stat, and this part of the video is now going into the pieces of gear that you want on the rogue. So this is going to be kind of rapid fire really fast. Again, I went over most of the, oh, this is actually something I mentioned already. The whole like legendary power where if you chill an enemy when you are hitting them with a grenade skill. So how it works is your traps, this is something where I gotta actually pull out the key passive over here. So exposure has the ability to reduce our cooldowns of our death trap, right? That's how we keep on spamming our ulti super fast. But it also has a chance to drop cluster grenades. I actually was thinking, I'm like, well, if I can stun the enemy, which actually really helps out too, and it deals a small amount of damage, but that actually could apply, because I have the frostbitten aspect, that actually can apply a freeze to the enemy, and it freezes them nearly 100% of the time. And I don't know if this is going to get patched, so just keep in mind, I'll update you guys if it gets patched, but it's pretty insane because as long as we have 50 crit, anytime those grenades drop, we're freezing them for 2 seconds. I think it's actually really strong and a little bit overpowered. I haven't seen any content creator talk about this too, which is mind-boggling because this thing is insanely powerful to the point where I was even considering, well, I considered already playing Concealment and I actually do like it, but there's another skill called Smoke Grenade, and there's another thing that we can make your dash activate Smoke Grenade, and then that would count too. So there's a little bit of play with this, so don't sleep on this skill unless it gets nerfed, because again, like if I have the grenades drop off of that, it's a 100% chance to actually freeze. As long as it activates, it's a 25% chance for activate, but as long as I have 50% crit strike chance, it's double your crit. Yeah, it's insanely good. It's your grenade skills, and that doesn't have to be activated like as a button. That activates literally from your key passive, so this is massive. Anyways, yeah, you're gonna do more damage to frozen targets, but the main thing is it just freezes, applies crowd control, and obviously with my homie that I'm playing with, he is playing a build where it does freeze. Let me move this a little bit over so we get a little bit more gameplay here, as long as you guys can still read this. But anyways, for the helm, you definitely have to get cooldown reduction. This is like a must. You gotta get cooldown reduction, you gotta get life. Otherwise, you're gonna be too squishy. Unfortunately, no crowd controlled impaired duration on that. Now, this is where things get like required to play this game. You can get up to 17% controlled impaired duration on your chest piece. You want this. You want to reach that 54% breakpoint. That means if you're frozen for 4, you're now frozen for 2. It's pretty big. Freezes will definitely kill you. If you want to, you can run topazes. I personally prefer rubies. I've talked about this before. Mix and match, whatever. But you definitely want to get life, and ideally you get that controlled impaired duration, or if you want to run concealment instead, hey, mix and match what you want to do if it's your build. Sometimes, you know, you may not get that controlled impaired duration, so you're like, you know, I'd rather just run concealment. The reason why I prefer rubies is I just prefer not to be crowd controlled at all, but hey, do what you want to do. As far as our gloves, obviously we want to get crit strike chance, attack speed, twisting blades, and trap cooldown reduction, but the other stat can be whatever. So you can run whatever pants you want. I showed off Temerity, but if you don't have Temerity, getting life is great, getting damage reduction is great, and then on top of that, this one has like less damage taken from crowd controlled enemies. This is phenomenal because you're just going to apply, if you're running, well, if you have Temerity, obviously you're not running these pants, but you can also just run this in general. Some of these, I've been just adding different aspects because I get a different higher roll, right? A 15% on one roll or another one, I'm like just applying whatever one that I have personally the best, but you want to try to get like life on pants. It's like, it's a huge thing. I already mentioned Penitent Greaves. There's no like special roll with this, but I like attack speed. No real change here, but you ideally want to get vulnerable damage, crit strike damage, core skill damage. I really like dexterity. I think it's another great multiplier. And then for our amulet, no special things here that it's not in other builds. You want cooldown reduction and movement speed. If you can get energy cost reduction, you could also get controlled impaired duration reduction here. So this, as well as on the Paragon board over here, it grants you up to, again, if you got good rolls, it's like over 50, I think it's 54% is what you're trying to shoot for. If you can hit 50%, awesome. Like on both, like obviously this is only 17, you get 17 here, you get another, was it 17 here, and then you get another, the rest is on the Paragon board. As far as our rings go, you definitely want to get crit strike chance, you want to get crit damage, vulnerable damage, and life. Because we drop a lot of our aspects for more offensive stuff, because, you know, obviously Temerity's defensive at the end of the day, but I like that chilled enemies hit by the grenade. This is technically defensive too, but I just like having that giant health pool, because there is a mechanic in the dungeon, I don't know if you guys have seen it, where there's a giant lightning that comes down, and it one-shots you if you're not inside the bubble. The bubble slows down my gameplay. I'm not a fan of the slow down gameplay. So what do I do? Well, I just have enough HP so I can just tank the whole thing. So sometimes there are certain things that you can just do in the game where it becomes a skill issue, or like, you know, if you're just wanting to be as fast as possible, you got to make sacrifices somewhere, right? So instead, I just opted to roll life, and life is really good. It helps out, again, when you're stunned, you have like extra threshold. And the thing that's so great with this build is as much HP you get. Interesting enough with Temerity, apparently the barrier only works off your base life, so any of the bonus life that you get doesn't actually stack with it, but it's still really good overall. I still think it's just awesome. And then another thing that you want is the restore energy, which we talked about. Nothing special. A lot of people ask swords or daggers, which is better. We actually just dropped a video going over everything, but in short, you want crossbow and you want swords. The reason why is the swords are in a separate damage bucket for crit strike damage. Crit strike damage is going to be better than closer damage. I know the closer damage says 30% more multiplier, or 30% multiplier via percent, not like an X, more damage versus an additive damage. At the end of the day, I know that some of these words are kind of confusing, so let's just put it this way. Your crit strike damage is going to be more valuable, even if it's half of the number, than getting close damage. Daggers roll close damage. Even though daggers have faster attack speed, I know that there's that argument too. No, crit strike damage will be superior in 99.9% of cases. The one exception is if you already have your crit strike damage at like 300%, which, you know, honestly, I don't even know if that's possible in this current iteration of the game. Most people are, you're like 150 plus-ish at like the higher end, but that would be the exception. And then you want vulnerable critical strike damage, core skill damage. You could get, like, some people are asking, is doing damage to trapped enemies okay? Sure, I mean, it works, but like vulnerable damage is almost always up with this build, right? Your crit strike damage is going to be up most of the time, and you're only doing damage with your core skill. Or like, if people have been asking also, is it good to get damage with closer enemies? Sure, but what if the, you know, monster, you just want to hit him a couple times, you want to move, and you want the twisting blades to just kind of come out and then do damage on the next enemy, it'll do a little bit less damage. So even though the difference between core skill and, let's say, what's the other keyword? It's close enemies. Close enemies, the difference that you get with this is what, 4% damage? So I'd rather have 19% damage up 100% of the time versus an additional 4% where it has some sort of condition. So some sort of conditions would be dazed. Currently on my swords right now, I have damage to dazed enemies. Do I daze the enemy most of the time? Yes, because over on my tree over here, I do happen to have the twisting blades improved blades, and I'm able to daze the enemies consistently. But the thing is I would still prefer not to have that, because that first initial hit, right? Because this is, enemies are dazed while in pain, so they have to be, you know, obviously dazed before that bonus damage activates. Hopefully that makes sense. Basically, what I'm saying is you want things that have 100% uptime versus like some sort of conditional one. However, if there is damage to crowd controlled or chilled, that will be up 100% of the time pretty much, because even though the enemy may be farther away, as long as they've been tagged, there's like a duration on when they are actually chilled. But for the most part, yeah, try to think about that. It's all about just min-maxing your character. This is kind of the stats that you're looking for. I'll also link the D4 planner over here. This one, by the way, does not have the Paragon. It's a little bit different. Well, there's no Paragon points in this one. So the Paragon board will be in the D4 Builds GG because I prefer their website. I like the interface a little bit more, and this one will have the Paragon board for you. The only real difference, I mean, you're still running the same ones that every single build is playing. You're running Control, Turf, as well as Exploit. Those are like the main ones that you want. Or is it close? What's it called? Close combat? Closer is what it's called. It's the same exact glyphs as the previous one. The only one that we added to our build is going to be called Frost Feeder. That's, you deal more damage to chill targets. And on top of that, I like this board because there's more vulnerable damage, which is a different multiplier. And then there's Exploit Weakness. And this is the other legendary one that I liked. But again, I'll link this down below. But if you want to like look at it and copy it from here, the ones that we're running are, of course, we have our starting board. We have No Witness, Tricks of the Trade. We've also got Cunning. And then lastly, we run the Exploit Weakness. Remember, you don't have to grab every legendary node. In fact, a lot of them are kind of very weak, especially on Rogue. There are some that are excellent. Specifically, I like having this one because you always activate your ultimate, so more damage right there. Anyways, that's going to wrap things up for the build for 70 to 90. But then we have our final one, which I'm going to require you guys to have literally the best in slot. So just try to get your upgrades. It takes time. I know some people are like, dude, I've never gotten these boots and I'm playing for like 50 hours. Well, you got to play for 50 more hours. I can't tell you how long it's going to take. I can't tell you a very specific boss, but I can tell you this was recently tweeted out officially by Joseph, which is one of the guys, Joseph P. He's working on the game. He tweeted out and said that the best way to get your items, okay, in the game is to do nightmare dungeons. So not regular dungeons, but the nightmare ones. Okay. Anyways, that's going to wrap things up in terms of like getting these drops. It just takes time. Okay. You want to try to get the most best rolls. And if your build isn't ready to swap to this one, go back to my 50 to 70 and look at the skills. You can still play those skills. It's not like they go away, but you really want to consider dropping your generator if you can. This is going to make your DPS legitimately doubled. Okay. The reason why is I can do my big damage deal the whole time versus damage deal. Okay. I need energy. All right. Damage deal or damage. Okay. Now I need to regen. So that's what the basic skills are supposed to do in the game. But at the end of the day, you can swap to what you want to and, you know, mix and match what you want to do. I do got to mention also, there is another way to apply vulnerability because some bosses may take a little bit longer and you're not going to kill them so fast. Most of the bosses I'm deleting so fast, and you guys have been watching this gameplay anyways, but there is a time time where you may see that the boss isn't vulnerable. If you want to, you can get the shadow imbuement where it activates that. Heck, you can even run concealment. There's another thing that gives you vulnerability. This is one thing that I was running when I was running my fastest rogue build in the game, which you guys can check out. I'll link it down below if you guys want to play it. It is going to be definitely faster, but it does give up some defenses and it also gives up some damage. But in return, you're going to be a little bit faster. So if your damage is super high up and you're one-shotting everything, I highly recommend checking that one out as well, because it is a little bit different take on the build. But for the most part, that wraps things up. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed it, drop a like on it. And if you're new here, well, I don't know why you're watching this part. Go watch part 1. But subscribe if you want to. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Peace.